Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello and welcome. And finally, we are at that stage. No, not the World Cup starting. It is again the Sport Business Weekly Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. No surprises that this week we're going to go big on the FIFA World Cup, which by the time you are listening to this, you may already know the score of the first game between Mexico and South Africa. And we will have Frank Dunne joining us a little bit later for Inside the Deal, where he'll go deep into the commercial numbers around this tournament, which, as no surprise to anyone in this industry, are huge. We'll also talk a little bit about last-minute deals in the tournament, and not just football. There's also an interesting story and development in the PGA Tour and links with golf in Australia. But firstly, with me as always, Martin Ross. Have you got your bag packed? Have you got your kilt packed? Have you got your passport ready?
I do, yes. Hi, John. Funnily enough, I got a message from an unnamed family member, that was my mum actually, who said, I don't think you should be taking your regular kilt there. She said a lot of people I've heard about have been taking thin fabric kilts for £30, but I'm not taking a thin fabric kilt. I'm taking the full caboodle, tartan trousers as well, but lots of shorts and flip-flops. And yes, heading to Boston and Miami are the Scotland games, but I've got a few different locations in between, but maybe not go into all those details. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I am in, World Cup mode. What are your kind of viewing plans? Have you worked out what you're going to do? I mean, how old are your kids? What will they be allowed to watch for England games?
Yeah, they're very annoyed because I think England got a couple of 9 o'clocks and a 10 o'clock, I think. That's a bit late for a midweek. And also, if it's anything like the England-New Zealand friendly the other day, I was at a family event at the weekend and the kids watched it, and I turned around at 11 p.m. to see all 4 kids sparko on the sofa. So that's a good a way as any to get kids to bed early. Yeah, I'll be watching as much as I can and probably relying on YouTube highlights the next morning. I'm going to be very young and trendy by getting all my highlights. I won't be watching too much live, I don't think. I envy you in the right time zone.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason I'm going, to be honest. And it is quite noticeable. If you look at the big TV markets and go through the kickoff times for England, France, Spain, Germany, not Italy, clearly, they are more favourable. It's kind of almost started to mimic the Rugby World Cup in a way, but that's just commercial factors, isn't it? Scotland have some pretty late 2 a.m. UK kickoffs. Austria have a 4 or 5 a.m.
Yeah, they've got a couple of shockers. Yeah.
So, yeah. Let's see. There's been some early World Cup news. So an early Golden Boot, I think you're going to tell us about. John, you scored 5 goals and a hat-trick at the Red Torch Invitational 5-a-sides this week.
Yeah, shout out to our friends at Red Torch putting on a great tournament on Monday in London. So there was 8 teams and we had, I think the BOA were there. We had a team. There was ATP had a couple of people, World Sailing as well. So yeah, it was good fun. We did not disgrace ourselves. We finished... Well, we lost to the winners in the semi-final by a narrow 1-goal margin. So
it's a very fun. English performance, actually. That
it was. We tired. We did well in the group, and then we.
And you told everybody you were going to win it during the group stage, and then you.
No, exactly. Yeah, no, we just couldn't get the ball off the other team, which is a bit of a problem, and we couldn't score. But yeah, I did. I rolled back the years, Martin, and I felt the pain for the last 2 days. I have to tell you.
Well, yeah, just quickly tell the listeners your footballing past.
And it is a past. It's a long... Yeah, well, I played for as an academy kid at Norwich and then had a non-league career, shall we say, just for a few years. But that is firmly in the past. And the muscles will testify to that.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to ask you in this kind of... Our opening section is a kind of mixture of an intro and the newsroom. We are going to move soon into some World Cup news topics. But on the Golden Boot theme, quiz question for you. Which Golden Boot winner went on to play for Al Nassr? It's a really difficult question, but it's an interesting one.
Well, it's not Ronaldo.
No.
Oh, a Golden Boot winner. I'm going to go for Roger Miller.
No, it's a kind of interesting history of the Saudi Pro League or the top league in Saudi. It's Hristo Stoichkov, who joined on a 2-match deal on loan from Barcelona in 1998. So that they could win, and he scored the winner in the Asian Cup Winners' Cup final, and he was paid $200,000 for a 2-match loan contract. But the first European player in the Saudi top league was Eamon O'Keefe, an Irishman who used to play for Hyde United in the Cheshire County League. And apparently his ex-manager at Stalybridge Celtic, talking about non-league football, gave him the call and said, do you want to come and join Al Hilal? Because his ex-manager got the Al Hilal gig somehow. And come and become the first ever European footballer in Saudi, which he was in 1976. So it goes back a bit longer than you think.
Well, actually, I was going to bring this up later, a little quiz for you, but you've thrown Stoichkov in the mix there. So I've got a little one for you, and it's with our friends from Uzbekistan. There's a guy from Bulgaria who played in '94 called Peter Mitarsky, and he has something in common with Akmal Mozgovoy of Uzbekistan, who's in the squad for the tournament. Do you know what that is?
Know the Bulgarian one, because he's the only Bulgarian who was in that squad who didn't have a V in his name, I think.
Yeah, you're correct. Akmal Mozgovoy is the same. He's the only player in the Uzbekistan squad whose name doesn't end in a V. I think actually the Bulgarian was different. It was everyone was OV, I think was the ending.
Yeah.
There we go. Anyway,
there we go. On to the slightly more commercially appropriate World Cup lead. I mean, I don't know. Did you see the front page of L'Équipe today?
I have not, I'm afraid.
I mean, you should have a look. It is kind of wraps up where the sentiment is, certainly in Europe. Don't know if there's a Europe bias around some of the reporting. It is a sterny-faced Donald Trump clasping the World Cup trophy in his left hand, a puppet of Gianni Infantino in his right hand, and then there's a picture of Omar Artan, the Somalian referee, who's obviously was refused admission to the country, and then a very kind of fierce-looking policeman with a US flag as well, and it just says "Welcome to the USA," I think.
I'll dig it out.
Which it feels to me like any other. I don't know. I'm trying to take myself back to Qatar when clearly there were massively serious issues at the time around migrant workers, around human rights, around LGBTQ rights. Big issues that didn't dissipate when the tournament began. But I feel like we're in that stage pre-World Cup, like almost at that stage pre-Olympics, when the noise is at its loudest around all the various controversies. I just don't know, how much do you think they're going to go away? I don't think the ticketing issue is going to go away, because match to match, if there are gaps and lowering prices on resale platforms, then that one's just not going to go away. The Iran controversy is not going to go away amid the ongoing political tensions. So as much as the football will take over, I think there's 2 or 3 themes, and you wrote a really good piece for On the Money this morning on the sort of cash grab. There's 2 or 3 themes that I just don't think will go away at this tournament.
No, I think the ticketing is the obvious one, isn't it? I mean, you'll know more than anyone. You've paid out a lot of money for tickets for games there. People are going to be, on the ground as their countries get further through the tournament. They're just going to be spending so much money. And it's not just the tickets. It's the issues we've had with transport on the ground, with hotels. I mean, I go to the US enough. It's expensive enough just to eat and drink there without being fleeced on the ticketing. When you compare, the revenue that they're going to get from ticketing to compare to previous tournaments, it's supply and demand. We know that. That's the economics of it. It is not very good PR, but it's also, the piece I wrote just looking at mainly the ticketing, just the numbers that FIFA are projecting from this, and some of the kind of hoops the host cities have had to jump through to be able to play a part in this tournament. Some of the smaller cities and the demands that they've had to do around their stadiums, what's needed to upgrade them for hospitality reasons, to accommodate the FIFA delegates and stuff. It leaves a bit of a bitter taste in the mouth, to be honest, for such a kind of showpiece of it.
It does. But yet there's big successes around this World Cup, whether it's, I suppose, the hospitality was always going to be a big sales point given the amount of tickets and such a commercially mature hospitality market. I suppose the buy-in for tickets has still been huge. The prices are considered by many to be pretty, grotesque, but people are still buying them. And as we'll speak to Frank later, the media rights sales have done pretty well. But yeah, as you say, on communication, it is a tricky one. And I'd be intrigued to say, I don't know if Gianni Infantino's having a press conference. I actually watched back his Qatar press conference not that long ago, which started with a 45-minute speech/lecture to the assembled press. But yeah, I don't see the comms around it changing anytime soon.
He is having a press conference in Mexico City. We're recording this Wednesday afternoon. It's either late this evening UK time or before the game on Thursday. I can't remember which one. But yeah, I mean, he hasn't done any media since that last press conference. He just doesn't do media. So it's going to be interesting if he actually takes any questions or just does his 45-minute I am feeling whatever.
Yeah, we'll see. Fascinating viewing. It will be. I mean, there was a couple of wrapping up some of the late sponsorship deals. Kraken, the timing of this is quite interesting, that Kraken has come in as a crypto exchange supporter and ExpressVPN as an official tournament supporter, US, Canada and Europe. That was announced today. Two sectors that carry with them controversy are not sponsorship deals that are going to offset sort of wider criticism. Did kind of tickle me a little bit. Clearly, the VPN one has been, the focus will be on digital security, etc. But even just the sort of VPN sponsorships have been, and lots of football rights holders do them, but have been controversial, even just themselves, given piracy and also the way that they lend people the opportunity to watch coverage that isn't in their countries, as it were. But we'll see. There's been a few sort of last minute. We're going to dive deeper into the real juicy media rights deals, but there's been a few last minute ones, haven't there, John? What was today?
Yeah, Sporty TV picked up some rights, free TV rights in Kenya, Nigeria, and more interestingly, given they're playing Ghana. So that was one that landed today. Briefly mentioned last week in a Kyrgyzstan deal. Bangladesh was wrapped up as well. Finally, That's been another tough little well, that kind of whole Asia region has been quite a tough sell for FIFA. They've done a deal there. Thailand, I think by the time this podcast lands, by the time the games kick off, that deal will be done, I think. But there was some talk of Jazz, the telco, having the rights and then actually announcing they hadn't. But I mean, this has gone through the government in Thailand. They've been heavily involved in getting this deal done. So
yeah, there's always one that goes right up to the wire. I would, if I was a betting man, which I am, I would say, yeah, as you said, if you're listening to this on a Thursday or a Friday, Thailand will have a deal in place. So much so the distribution, I'm not aware of any. We'll go on to discuss the YouTube broader streaming, but I don't think there's kind of a dark markets solution. I mean, even Laos announced a deal earlier this week. Star Telecom is going to put it behind an app. I think it was announced as free, but you have to sign up to the mobile data home internet package. So yeah, all these late deals being ticked off, and we will see how the whole thing comes to pass. The opening ceremonies are taking place obviously before 3 different opening ceremonies before the 3 different home hosts matches. So that's going on at the same time. You can watch those. BBC's on iPlayer showing it on its games. So yeah, lots of viewing possibilities, as you can imagine. But switching just quickly to another sport, John, golf. Australia's always been a potential market and a dormant market in many respects, a very golf-hungry audience there. Lots of people play golf, but there's an existing events on the PGA Tour of Australasia, which have kind of done co-sanctioning deals with maybe Asian Tour, One Asia over the years. But there was pretty significant co-sanctioning deal done for the Australian Open, and that was announced today.
Yeah, this is really interesting. You say the background there, massive market. Golf is a sport where you follow the sun, so it fits the golf calendar quite nicely when they stage the Australian Open early December. And yeah, the PGA Tour for the first time is co-sanctioning it. Now, the Australian Open, Golf Australia has worked with DP World Tour in previous seasons. Now the PGA Tour coming on board for the first time for the next 3 editions, 27, 28, 29. And I think what's interesting more about this, for that tournament specifically, we know what that means. It's going to mean it has its own kind of window in the golf calendar. There's going to be better prize money. Therefore, you're going to get the world's best players. Now, they've had a few decent. I think Rory McIlroy was there last year, but it's clashed with, I think, Tiger Woods' tournament. So that's often kept some of the big players away. You're not going to have that clash now, which is, really important for them. But I just think, your golf more than I do, and we've been covering a lot of the struggles that Liv are having. Liv Golf is now in an active process of trying to find new investment. Australia was their kind of real success story. That event in Adelaide financially was a success. I think it was generating revenue over $25 million US in 2024, the last kind of available numbers there. This year's event, I think, Martin, you said over 110,000 people.
115,000, yeah, including 38,500 on the Saturday, which is the single day record for any live event.
Yeah.
It's had huge buy-in from, as you say, sort of golf-hungry fans. And, who's not to say it won't take place next year and there'll still be continued support. But there were reports in the Golf Press recently that Liv was looking at aligning with the Australian Open. Broader picture, Liv is looking at different national opens, and Scott O'Neill has said as much. But the PGA Tour, and this looks like a win for them, really, and it's also includes the DP World Tour, I think, in the co-sanctioning, in terms of just getting a bit of that market. And whether there's, they're talking this time next year, in 2 years, there will still be the PGA Tour Live debate. Who knows? But it is, it's a big event. It's been held at Royal Melbourne many, many times, which is the oldest course in Australia. As you say, a lot of PGA Tour stars have kind of tapped into it. Rory McIlroy's won it. Jordan Spieth won it twice. Cam Smith, Mark Leishman, both Australian, both now Live, ex-PGA Tour, would always go and play in it. Joaquin Niemann, and the Live players would play in it partly actually to get ranking points. So Joaquin Niemann's won it. It already got a kind of sprinkling of talent, but I think this now guarantees a better field, clearly. Might guarantee a better audience window, better promotion. It's kind of one of those ones that's been hard to believe it's been on TV, in the UK in the past. You have been able to watch it, but it's been a bit of a find, whereas now I think it'll be absolute, front and centre, which can only be a good thing for the Golf Australia. Let's see what the impact is on Live, but yeah, that's an interesting dynamic as that whole thing kind of unpicks itself.
Yeah, and I think that looking ahead, the PGA Tour is going through a kind of planned revamp. The new CEO, Brian Rolap's come from the NFL where, less is more. So I think you're going to see fewer. I think the PGA has something like 45 tournaments. We're going to potentially see, half of them seen as kind of what they're going to call track one or first track tournaments. And then you're going to have some signature events. You're going to have a second tracker tournament. So he's really going to almost like a promotion relegation. So it's going to be interesting to see where else they, how many of these they look to take outside of the US. I know he's talking about more bigger tournaments in major US markets where perhaps they don't, for TV markets mainly. I think there's a meeting on the 22nd of June where they're going to hopefully rubber stamp some of these plans. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to kind of keep an eye on, not just with Live, but with the PGA Tour as well, and how they can take advantage of potential gaps in the calendar.
Great. Thanks, John. Yeah, one other item just to run with before we move on and speak to Frank, but it's been an interesting case in Canada recently, which will have lessons for other big markets where international streamers are coming in, whether they are taxed, whether they're not taxed, impact on some level of Canadian content. Yourself and Catherine have covered this, and we can put some links into the pod notes, but tell us a bit more about what happened towards the end of last week.
Yeah, I go back about 3 weeks, actually. The Canadian regulator ruled that any foreign streamer operating in Canada with over, I think, 25 million Canadian dollars in annual revenue, about 18 million US dollars. So not a lot, really, when you're talking about Netflix, Amazon, Paramount Plus, all of those come under that. They'd have to pay a 15% Canadian programming tax, essentially, which is up from 5%. So, 3 times more. That kind of may have gone down well with some, but it didn't go down well with the Canadian government, because their concern is that all that's going to happen is that your Netflix, Amazon, etc., are just going to put the price up. So the consumer's going to end up having to pay for this. So end of last week, the Canadian government has now called on the regulator to review that plan to triple the fund. They have now instead suggested, or earmarked, should I say, around 600 million Canadian dollars to broadcast sector to cover projected lost revenue, albeit that is essentially going to be paid by consumers through tax. So the consumer's getting hit either way this comes. It actually coincided, the government decision, with Paramount, as we had kind of previewed in previous pods, expanding their UFC package of rights even further. So we know the US, obviously, Australia, other parts of South America, they've now gone into Canada exclusively, 2027 to 32. So again, when you think of Paramount Plus having UEFA club rights, when you think of Netflix's Women's World Cup deals in Canada, Amazon have a NHL deal that actually expires this year. That's why this tax was kind of brought forward, and the government are trying to work with the regulator to see how that should actually play out. But as you say, it's not just a Canadian story. I think this is a much broader one that's going to have ramifications in markets around the world, particularly ones where at the moment there is, listed legislation or loosely listed legislation.
Brilliant. Thanks, John. Yeah, definitely one to watch in various different markets moving very quickly. We will be back very shortly when Frank Dunne, editor at large, will be joining us to talk and give us a bit of a breakdown of World Cup media rights values and discussing FIFA and some of its rights holding broadcasters embracing YouTube and TikTok in a much bigger way than previously. We'll be back very shortly.
From private equity to global media and US college sports, unlock the most trusted data and insights in our reports. Explore more at sportbusiness.com.
Hello, welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast for Section 2, Inside the Deals, where we're joined by Frank Dunne. Now, normally, Frank, we look at one deal, but it's the World Cup, so there are multiple. We won't read through every single one. But there is a deal being done in Italy, Frank, and obviously they're not there. You're in Italy. What's the vibe like at the moment on the streets of Bologna?
Sad. I was playing football the other day and I was chatting to the guys afterwards. I was saying, are you going to be watching it? And the consensus was, we're not going to watch it. Not going to watch it at all. It's just too sad for them to see it without Italy in there. But I'm sure once it starts, a lot of them being football fans will get into it.
There's enough games in the middle of the night, right? So you can kind of pretend it's not happening, I guess.
Yeah, well, for the insomniacs and stuff, it'll be a good tournament.
How did you feel we were talking earlier about how this feels unlike any other tournament. I mean, obviously some big issues ahead of Qatar 2022. In the same way with an Olympics, you get huge and rightly huge media attention on everything that's going on. It feels like that to an nth degree here. And some of these issues I just think are going to run and run throughout the tournament. But what's your feeling ahead of, what's a very different World Cup, shall we say?
Yeah, I think on one hand, I was thinking about this the other day, that as far back almost as I can remember, or certainly if you go back to, say, 2010, I remember reading loads of scare stories about how South Africa was going to be terrible, about the crime, about this and that, infrastructure. And a lot of these things didn't come to pass. That, it was a successful tournament. So a few days ago, I was thinking, there might be a lot of, knee-jerk reaction about the States for political reasons. But things have been happening in the last few days, which are making some of our worst fears come true. The Somali ref being sent home, the way the Iran players are being treated. So I just hope it's not going to be as bad as I fear. I'm sure the football on the field will be good, but it's everything else around that causes concern.
Yeah, your concerns are shared, I must say. But we'll move on to the numbers and the media rights strategy and the digital streaming strategy. The budgets, which were unveiled, I think, obviously back a few years ago for 23 to 26, the budgeted figure for media rights was 3.93 billion, representing 44% of all revenue. Sponsorship, 1.79 billion. Hospitality and ticketing, 3 billion, which is a whole podcast in itself as to why it's at that figure. But yeah, an increase on Qatar was expected. Frank, do you maybe talk us through the strategy going into this and some of the factors that have affected the sales and just to where we've got to?
Yeah, well, the obvious thing that I think that everyone points to, and it's kind of common sense, is the fact that the tournament has been expanded to 48 teams, which means 104 games. So there's a lot more inventory for broadcasters. So, that is one of the main drivers of the increase. But I think it's some of the conversations I've had in the last week. We're in the process, I should say, of trying to basically put together a granular analysis of every single deal and to arrive at our own figure. There's an official FIFA figure, the one you quoted, 3.9 billion. As we talk, on the verge of the World Cup, we know that there are still some deals being closed. There are still some markets where a deal hasn't been announced. The last time I looked, Thailand hadn't been done. So I think some deals are still being closed off. So we're going to try between today and tomorrow to get to an absolutely accurate number for the media rights value. But yes, there has been an increase already. There's no question about that. The increase in inventory is a factor. But one commercial broadcaster said to me, I was talking to him, and he'd been in a difficult negotiation with FIFA about the rights, FIFA pushing for an increase. And he said, you have to understand commercial television. Having a huge increase in the volume of games is not necessarily a good thing for us. In fact, it can be quite the opposite. If you're a linear public service commercial broadcaster, you're meant to cater to large different types of audience, largest as possible. Trying to schedule that volume of games, and especially when a lot of the additional inventory is in the expanded qualification stage, so, the lesser games in theory. So I think the idea that increased inventory automatically equals increase in revenue doesn't work like that. I think it's as much of a challenge to some broadcasters as a benefit. But there are things that FIFA has done this time round, which have added to their coffers. One kind of administrative thing, which is probably kind of a bit dull for the average football fan, but it's the kind of thing that is food and drink to us, is that they've taken the rights, the sale of the rights in Asia back in-house. So for a long time, they were using agencies. So they were selling on the rights to agencies who then would sell them on to broadcasters. Agencies were making a healthy margin on that. Now, one of the things that in theory, if you bring the rights back in-house, then the margin that was going to the agencies goes into FIFA's coffers instead. One of the challenges is that basically you have to have the people in-house to do these deals. So an agency like Infront, for example, which is a historic partner of FIFA in Asia, they've got the people, they've got the know-how, they've got the infrastructure, they've got the relationships, they've got the data to be able to deliver these deals. So FIFA has to replicate that, which isn't easy. And as you know, as you're aware, the deals that we've been following, the ones that have been coming in late, have nearly all been in Asia. It's been a very difficult region for them this year. There are a number of other things, though, that FIFA has done this time, which didn't exist last time in terms of the types of rights they've made available. Two things in particular that we've written about, which I think are quite interesting. This is the first men's World Cup finals ever where they've made available betting streaming rights. So the service which eventually ends up in the bookies that people watch and bet around. And they did a deal with a company called Stats Perform. And it was a 4-year deal. It covered lots of different FIFA content, FIFA properties, but the bulk of the value was in the World Cup. And the total value of the deal was about $35 million US. The bulk of that value, I couldn't put a precise number on it, but the bulk of it is around the World Cup. Now, it's not an absolutely new thing for FIFA as an organization, because when they did the deal with DAZN for the FIFA Club World Cup, they included betting streaming rights in that, which then DAZN sold on to an agency. So it's not absolutely new, but it's the first time it's ever happened for a men's World Cup. So that's bringing in some additional revenue. There is also another initiative, which is on paper is really interesting. And this is the deal that they did with YouTube and TikTok. And they've been talking to other social platforms as well. And it's a very unusual deal because they've done these agreements with the platforms whereby the platforms can then go and talk to existing FIFA broadcasters. So let's take an example. Let's say ITV in the UK already has the rights in the UK to show a certain number of games. Now YouTube and TikTok can speak to ITV and they can do a deal whereby ITV, if it chooses, and this applies to any rights holding broadcaster, can put 10 minutes of live footage on those platforms at the beginning of the game. And in essence, the concept is quite simple, that this short teaser is being used almost as like a kind of gateway drug to get people to see the full live coverage. Now, FIFA's logic behind this, and I think it's a sensible one, FIFA's view is there are different types of audience and they're in different places. So the people who are habitually going to TikTok or YouTube, and that's their default kind of platform, that's where they spend most of their time, those people are not necessarily the same people who would be watching a 90-minute linear broadcast of a live football program. But if you can get this stuff in front of them, you might encourage them to migrate. So that's good for the broadcasters, it's good for FIFA, it's good for the platforms. So it's the kind of thing which, in theory, obviously there's extra money for FIFA as well, because YouTube is paying 20 million quid for these rights, and TikTok, we think, is paying 25 million, surprisingly, even more than YouTube. So the bottom line is good for FIFA. But in theory, on paper, it's one of those deals that looks like everybody benefits. The broadcasters get an extra audience. FIFA expands to an extra audience. There's additional incremental advertising revenue for everybody. But I think the question will be, and it will be interesting to speak to broadcasters at the end of the tournament, will this work in practice? Is that how digital behavior works? Is that how young people, because obviously we're talking about a slightly different demographic watching on TikTok than is watching traditionally on ITV's linear channels. Does that migration work? Does that customer journey work? That, I'm maybe watching on my mobile phone, looking at TikTok. I don't. I'm 64, so I don't spend time looking at TikTok on my mobile phone. But if I were a young person doing that, would I then be encouraged to go and seek out the live coverage? So I think the proof of the pudding is in the actual delivery, the actual experience. Does it work? We'll see. But I think the concept, I think the idea behind it is a good one.
Yeah, on that, Frank, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, it really interests me the fact that they've done this, and I'm interested. I don't know if I'll ever know who really drove it, whether it was the digital social media team really driving this initiative, whether it was the media rights sales team, because obviously, as you say, there's minimum guarantees being paid in these deals. One affects the other, affects the sales for, future sales. But I suppose bigger picture, is this a digital audience play? And the lure for the broadcasters is a small amount of ad revenue share. Some of them have signed up. I just looked at a few of them, but BBC, TSN, RCN and Columbia. There's some, we've not got a full list yet. But our bigger picture is this trying to get YouTube to the table for a big piece of the rights pie in 2030, which maybe outside the US, they're not really spending big rights fees now in the current climate.
I think that's part of it. I mean, I think trying to find new audiences is genuinely a driver of the whole project, both for FIFA and the broadcasters. So I think expanding, that's a genuine driver of the project. A collateral benefit, of course, is you're creating these relationships with digital platforms ahead of 2030, because we're in that odd phase now that, we all write about, of where the industry is shifting away from dominance of traditional linear broadcasters, traditional paid television broadcasters, and more to streaming platforms. We've been doing some research recently looking at the investments that have been made by the streamers. And if you just go back to 2022, and you had that famous quote by Netflix saying, we're not anti-sport, we're just pro-profit, basically defending their position of not buying sports rights. You go forward a couple of years and Netflix is spending $7 billion on sports rights. Apple TV, YouTube TV, all of these guys are going to be courted and expected to be at the table ahead of 2030. So whether that's the kind of hidden agenda or merely a collateral benefit, I think that's definitely part of the whole thing.
The interesting point that you made about, who is watching this. Look at the success of Kazay TV, right? But it's not traditional broadcast, right? That's the whole point of why these things are a success to the audience they are. It's not just simulcasting 10 minutes of a game that I can also watch on the BBC. The success of this digital coverage has been a different way of covering the game, right? It might feel more like a group of guys watching it in a bar. That's what has been particularly successful in the US with something like John Boy Media with their baseball coverage. It's that feeling that I'm there with my friends virtually. I just wonder if it's just the same coverage. Is that actually, as you say, going to drive people to watch 10 minutes on their phone? 10 minutes is actually quite a long time as well. I wonder if it's, 10 minutes of Scotland-Haiti game. Is that really going to encourage me at 2 a.m. to tick onto BBC? I'm just wondering what audience they think they are getting from this and where they see that, as you say, that audience journey, I think is the most interesting aspect of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point, because I think what people are getting, as you say, is this exactly the same thing they'll be getting if they just switched on their telly at kickoff time, the first 10 minutes. So whether it's BBC or whoever that's doing it, what you'd be watching on your device or on your digital platform is exactly the same content. It's not something that has been restructured or recreated, or there's no additional data. There's no, they're not throwing any influencers in there. Although, again, that remains to be seen. I think there are lots of aspects of this deal we don't know fully the details. And we have been hearing that FIFA, along with DAZN, have been putting together this whole kind of battery of influencers who are going to have some kind of role around the content that's not exactly 100% clear yet. So we'll know within a couple of days whether this is something that's going to work or not, I think. I think it'll become clear very quickly. As far as I know, it's just the same content in a different environment.
And I'm wondering if we can clear up, I don't know the answer to this actually, but a couple of the misconceptions. One of the misconceptions was that broadcasters could just stick it out on YouTube. It's not that simple. They have to negotiate an agreement with YouTube or TikTok, or have an existing agreement and maybe tweak that. And the other one was that they were talking about selected live matches in full. I don't know. I'm not aware of any of the offerings by broadcasters doing that, or whether it's going to be Uzbekistan, the DR Congo that they might stick out free. But are you aware of any full games going out?
I've not spoken to anyone who's confirmed they're doing that. I mean, I've spoken to people who've said that in certain, maybe really small markets, it might be beneficial. Obviously, if you do that, you're giving up 50% of your advertising revenues to YouTube automatically, or whatever it might be, 45%. But YouTube has a very powerful technology stack, and there may be parts of the world where it might be actually beneficial to be on YouTube rather than your own digital platform or your own linear channel even. But I haven't seen any confirmed. When I wrote about the deal, I tried to find out exactly what that meant and how many games it could be and what the circumstances would be. But there's no transparency around that as yet.
I just want to go back to the start where we talked about the volume play, the number of the more inventory, more money. It's quite straightforward. How much has it changed the balance between public broadcasters, commercial broadcasters, and pay TV operators having to come in? Because, as you say, it's one, you've got to try and refinance this, and two, I don't have enough channels to show all of these games. To what extent has that balance changed for this tournament compared to previous ones?
I think not as much as I would have expected, to be honest. And I mean, let's take two examples. Let's take the UK, 104 games, two broadcasters. Now, BBC and ITV have always shared. That's one of the curiosities that basically it's effectively a duopoly and they never compete against each other. And with it being a listed event, they're realistically the only broadcasters who can show it. And as you know, historically, FIFA and UEFA have tried to get that changed through the courts and failed to do so. But leaving that aside, 104 games on those two broadcasters. Now, you could say, and in Italy, Rai, who doesn't even have the Italian team involved, as far as I know, is going to show every single game on its linear channels. You could say this is a classic example of where it would make sense to have a pay and free combination. So you have a certain number of games on the linear channels and then sell some on. Either the broadcaster could sublicense or FIFA could sell some on. This happened in France, where M6 has got the free-to-air rights, the commercial broadcaster, and beIN Media has got the pay television. But that was already the model in France. That's not a new thing. That's not a change since last time. So, I mean, looking at a lot of the markets, I don't think that is the real, certainly considering the volume of games, I haven't seen that manifested in, it seems to me that if you look down the broadcast list for 2026 and look down the broadcast list for 2022, it's very, very similar across the world.
Yeah, there were certainly public broadcasters who went even ahead of the negotiations. AMD as ZDF were two who said, we just can't refinance this anymore. Plus, then you bring the kickoff time element into the mix as well. Some of these games kicking off at 3 a.m. CET, 5 a.m. CET. So, yeah, it's certainly shaken out that way. Great. Thank you, Frank. That was invaluable across media rights and also the digital strategy first that FIFA is rolling out at this World Cup. Keep a lookout for Sport Business Media piece that will be going live in the coming days for a real accurate representation of the overall value. And we look forward to having you back on soon, Frank. Cheers for joining.
Thank you. And Martin, look after yourself out there.
I will do. I've already told John I'm wearing a woolen kilt, so I'm going to need plenty of air conditioning, under-kilt air conditioning. Cheers. We will be back very shortly for a look ahead and any other business.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the final section of the Sport Business Podcast. A look ahead. Martin, you're looking ahead to your flight, but away from football. Have you got anything else on the agenda that you'll be keeping an eye on while you're cooling down in the US?
Yeah, depends when people listen. This is either a look ahead or a look back. But the FIS, International Ski and Snowboard Federation Congress, is taking place today and tomorrow. The elections are, tomorrow or today, Thursday, depending when you're listening, or yesterday, in Belgrade. It is extremely contentious. We'll drop a couple of links into the notes without going through all the details. But yeah, Johan Elias, who has been a very controversial figure over the years that he's been there, is being challenged by Alexander Osbelt, who's a lawyer from Liechtenstein. There's a sole challenger now because Vicky Gosling from GB Snow Sports pulled out, I think, to try and generate as many votes as they can for the challenger. And the reason being there is almost a mini civil war in skiing now. A lot of the big federations have hit out at Johan Elias, hit out his management. Obviously, we wrote a lot about the plans for centralisation, which splintered skiing a little bit. Now what's under real sharp focus is the finances of FIS. That's from big ski associations, Switzerland, USA, others in the Nordics have come out and been critical. And then also skiers have been critical as to how much prize money has actually been paid out. That's kind of erupted at the start or the end of last week, actually, when Urs Lehmann, CEO of FIS, who only came on board a year ago to take up this new post that was meant to build bridges. He used to be president of Swiss Ski. He stood down basically in protest because of recent developments, and that has kicked off a whole chain of events. Different people chiming in, including Christian Scherer, who is Secretary General of the Austrian Ski Federation, or outgoing. He told Blick, now he claims that the FIS budget has got a structural deficit of 5.7 million Swiss francs for 26-27. He's saying that FIS is no longer going to make a profit from its activities, and that FIS was, under the previous leadership, able to support its members without jeopardizing its financial stability. So there's similar sound bites across Europe, specifically against Eliash. Eliash, in his defense, has informed national ski associations that he believes that, though he says there's been a near doubling of FIS's sponsorship revenues, he says distribution's up. He wrote a letter out to them that there's been 114 million to member associations, up from 69. And crucially, on the reserves point, which has been under the microscope, he said that there's been an audited positive operating result of about 7 million Swiss francs. And that reserves of cash and cash equivalents of 114 million in 2025. That was what national associations were informed of. It will be hugely controversial if he stays, and there will be a big uproar. It'll be really interesting to see what happens either way, actually. Either it's going to be a fresh new start, or it's going to be, I imagine, acrimony. One to look out for.
Alex Osberg, I mean, that's a hell of a gig from someone from Liechtenstein to be president of an IF. It's a population of about 40,000 people. So that must be, he'd be the president, surely, from the smallest country of an IF. I don't know that. I don't know
You've been
many
to
famous.
Liechtenstein?
I haven't. You must have when you lived in Switzerland, did you?
I have. I went to see Scotland play there. They won 2-0.
Yeah,
They actually got into the Vaduz newspaper. My friends and I got in because I was wearing a kilt and a Liechtenstein top. So we were snapped by a local snapper and went into the paper, which is a distribution of about 100 people and a few cows. But we actually literally crossed the border. You can get a train to the station nearest to Liechtenstein, and then you walk over the border and you walk past cow fields. I was walking past cow fields wearing a kilt and a Liechtenstein top, and I have a picture of a very confused looking cow as to what on earth is coming across the border here.
Yes.
But yes, let's see if it's a big day for Liechtenstein and that Alex Osberg gets elected or not. You are not off to Liechtenstein. You are off to the Balkans, I believe.
I'm off to Dubrovnik, for some E1 powerboat kind of series, the electric boat racing. Interesting time. They've got a new CEO who's only been there a couple of months, Jamie Copas, who joined from WPP, actually, from an ad agency. We've done a lot on these kind of challenger events. The electric Formula E we've written a lot about E1 as well. It's, it is commercially, it's a tough gig. Media rights, sponsorship, it's a tough play, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see. They've got a lot of celebrity team investors, the likes of Didier Drogba, Rafa Nadal, Will Smith. I think Tom Brady's involved. So interested to find out, what is the investment thesis for E1 commercially? Where do they go under a new CEO who's kind of come from outside of sport? So it's going to spend the weekend in Dubrovnik before England play Croatia. I'll be home by the time England play Croatia, thankfully. So
nice. I'm curious as to how they're kind of messaging it. I think when it first came out, I'm trying to remember, the branding was something like "Electrify the Waters," which sounded very dangerous. I mean, no, don't be throwing a toaster in your bath. But yeah, I must say, I've never been to an E1. Very curious to know how that goes, and also curious to know what the World Cup vibe's like. Trouble with Dubrovnik is it's always just heaving with tourists, so it's hard to get a sort of local vibe. But
so I've read, yeah,
lovely place though.
Yeah, it looks lovely. So
excellent. Any other business, John? I'm going to finish off by just bit of symmetry. Just ask you a couple of quiz questions to finish off. Given we are going all things World Cup, Golden Boot winners. This is one that. Well, let's see. 1970.
Well, you want me to name?
Well, actually, no, I'm going to go 1970. Well, 70 and 74. It's kind of like it comes as a couple.
Would be. Oh God, no! It's not who I thought it was. I don't think it is. It's too early for Muller, so no, I don't know.
No, one is Muller. Which one do you think Muller is? Do you think it's 70 or 74?
70, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, that's right. Most people slip up and say 74 because West Germany won it. No, 74 is actually Gregor Zlato of Poland.
Oh, never heard of it.
Poland did remarkably well at a few World Cups. And the other one I have for you is 1986 World Cup was hosted in...
Well, Mexico. Gary
Yes,
Lineker Golden Boot. I actually watched Gary Lineker's Netflix. He's doing his podcast on Netflix. I watched that today. It was what you'd expect. Lads being lads, talking about being drunk in New York. Not sure it was quite the BBC etiquette. That's why he's gone to Netflix. But sorry to interrupt.
No. So that wasn't the question. That was too easy to be the question. Where was 1986 meant to be?
Oh, Colombia.
Yes, there we go. I knew you'd get a hosting question right.
There was some kind of war going on, right? Is that a coup or something?
There was financial elements around, I think, the building of this infrastructure in the stadium as well, but possibly a coup at the same time. John, I wish you well for the tournament. I wish your team well.
Thank you, Mel, and to
as
you.
You can imagine.
I know you're away for 2 weeks. I genuinely hope that you message me to say you're coming back at least a week later. I hope you.
No, I'm coming back
travels.
regardless. But if they make it to the semi-finals, I'll be back out. But we know that's not going to happen.
Okay. Well, good luck. Safe travels. Take care. And maybe if you get 5 minutes, you could send us a little voice note from a diner or something when you're eating your waffles to let us know.
Yeah,
how
I'll
it is.
do a voice note from after I've been to a game, and you can get a bit of an idea as to what
Sounds
the
good.
access has been like.
Perfect. Well, that's as good a place as any to wrap up. Enjoy the start of the World Cup, everyone that is listening. As always, for the most accurate rights feeds across media and sponsorship, and keep an eye out for Frank's FIFA World Cup deep dive, please visit sportbusiness.com, and we will be back. Well, I will be back with another podcast next week. Thank you.